Welcome to Norse Code, episode 109. I'm your host, Dusty O'Connell, joined as per usual by in-house analyst, blogger extraordinaire, useful human, and regrettably Star Wars enthusiast, Arif Hassan.
I will not listen to your Star Wars slander today, Dusty. Not on today of all days. Also not on most days. Fuck you.
I feel like most days you do not put up with my my Star Wars heresy, as you would probably describe it. But that's fine. I'll give you a chance to wax poetic about some stupid movie in a minute or two. But before we do that, a couple of hat tips to listeners. So you may know it, or you may remember that last week we received a rather generous donation from a listener all the way from Sweden. And I was like, most dedicated Scandi listener. Joachim Ortman at J_Ortman on Twitter writes in to ask, why didn't you recognize Denmark as a Scandic country last week? Because I'm American, and geography is not our strong suit.
Yeah, geography is a word that it takes us a long time to even learn in schools, I think.
Well, and since being technically right is the best kind of right, I want to maybe clear the air, perhaps correct the record completely. I was actually speaking of the Scandinavian peninsula, which is like Norway and Sweden and the northernmost part of Finland. The Nordic countries, also known as the Scandic countries, are generally thought to include Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, but also Finland and Iceland, which...
I have issues with Finland being included in that, by the way, but that's neither here nor there.
What issue could you possibly have with Finland being considered a Nordic country?
They're ethnically way more distinct from the rest of the four Nordic countries you identified, man.
Well, okay, but they're culturally and ethnically fairly homogenous. Like
culturally, they're further apart from the rest of the Scandic countries than any of the individual Scandic countries that are not Finland are from each other. And their language is way different, man. Finnish is a dumb language. I am on the record about this.
They still teach Swedish in Finnish schools, probably because Finnish is kind of a dumb language.
It's super dumb. Anyway, I haven't tried learning it, so maybe my opinion's like way off on this. I'll admit that. But people have told me about things like the conjugation rules and how its etymology and history in its family of languages is just way too different from like the countries that surround it, and it doesn't make sense. So I believe the people who speak it when they say that it's dumb. Anyway, we can include Finland when we say the most dedicated listener of Norse Code is from this group of 4 and/or 5 countries.
Well, we could also include Greenland, but Greenland is mostly polar bears. And if there are any polar bears listening to Norse Code, please email us. We would love to feature you in a mailbag.
Yeah, what's more Viking than a Norse Code fan? That's a polar bear.
That's an actual polar bear. No, I guess to put a final point on it, I think the linguistic similarity and the kind of mutual intelligibility of all the languages that are taught in schools in those 4/5 countries makes them all Nordic countries. And if they were all combined, according to Wikipedia, they would form the 7th largest country in the world.
Hooray!
So there you go. There's a much longer answer than you ever bargained for, Joachim. That'll teach you to answer questions, to ask questions.
I think at this point our listeners kind of know when they ask like a one-off clarifying question or a one-off joke question that we'll take it too seriously.
We will go way, way too far. At any rate, Ruben Lilleland from Norway. I'm not really sure how addresses in Norway are broken down, so I'm not going to get any more specific than that.
From Norway.
From somewhere, there's numbers and words that I'm not really sure how to pronounce, and I don't know what their relationship is. I don't know if it's like cities and states in America, so we'll just say that Ruben is from Norway. He sends in another fairly significant donation with the note, "Greetings from Norway. Keep up the good work, guys. Skull from the second most dedicated Viking fan of Scandinavia." Well, thank you, Ruben. That is a very sweet thing for you to say and to do.
Also, very Scandinavian not to put up a fight about this title thing and just kind of, just like, well, you can have number 1. That's fine.
Well, no, and the funny thing is that he was very generous, but he still did donate a little bit less than.
Oh my!
He is actually the second most dedicated Viking fan in Scandinavia thus far.
Wow, the follow through. Good job, man.
I know the just the upfront, no nonsense honesty of those in all Nordic countries is something to be admired and maybe one day emulated.
Emulated.
So thank you, Ruben, and thank you for your excellent question, Joachim, and thank you to everyone else that has ever contributed to Norse Code. If you would like to join the pantheon of listeners, Scandi or not, who have contributed to make this show an ongoing success, then check out our website at norsecodepodcast.com. And at the bottom of the page, at least for now, you will find links to donate either once via PayPal or to become a recurring, I guess, monthly supporter with our Patreon page at patreon.com/norsecode, the number one funding method for successful podcasts around the world. Please consider a recurring donation of an amount of your choice. Even $1 or $2 a month makes it easier for us to plan kind of our finances for the year, because we have to pay for bandwidth costs every month, and even during the season there's a big spike in downloads, and we push more content. We have larger files and more of them, but it still costs us about the same to put the show out in the off season for reasons that I'm not going to bother getting into here. So monthly donations are much preferable, because that way we can more accurately plan our budget for the entire year, not just the 2 months or so when everybody gets in line to throw money at us, and then no one wants to donate when we're doing our seventh show about the draft.
Right.
All right, so I guess you went to a movie yesterday. No, this is actually kind of a big deal. So today, Friday, is the opening day for Star Wars: The Force Awakens, which is a gigantic ESPN/Disney, cultural phenomenon.
ESPN.
Well, no, did you see this morning?
Yes,
ESPN? Yeah.
yes.
All right, we're not going to talk about it any more than that, because it's frankly embarrassing to everyone involved. But Arif managed to score himself. Well, maybe it was your significant other that did it for you, but I remember seeing, what was it, 8 tickets in the hand of someone.
10 tickets.
10 tickets associated with someone with you, and 10 tickets, and I assume you and your SO and 8 of your friends went to go see a movie.
We hawked one of the tickets because one of our friends had to bow out for reasons beyond their control. But yes, we went to go see a movie. It
Were
was
you a
fantastic
kind science fiction fan? Did you sell it at face value, or did you try to recoup?
I just was not familiar with what face value was. So,
You just took your best guess and sold it for that?
we took a guess that was maybe a bit generous to us.
That's fair. So now I'm going to warn you right now, and probably everybody who's been using the internet this morning has run into this as well, but Facebook is nearly completely unusable. It is all people who have either seen Star Wars and are attempting to rave about it without spoiling anything, people who have not seen it that want to see it, that are insisting that nobody spoil anything for them, and then a very small third group of people who will soon have no friends, who are just posting whatever they think about Star Wars, spoiler indifferent. So,
Yeah, there are people who are posting, I don't care if you post Star Wars spoilers, and I don't care if you post that you don't want to see Star Wars spoilers. I just want to bring home the point that I don't care about Star Wars. And it's like, man, really?
so Disney and ESPN don't even own Facebook yet, and they have still managed to completely consume it with this, cultural phenomenon. So, being aware of those 3 groups of people, what were your thoughts on the film?
Yeah, sure. And I'm gonna obviously keep this as spoiler free as I can. I thought it was actually a fantastically done film. I think that a lot of people obviously had a lot of apprehension about it for fairly obvious reasons. But I thought that it was handled really well. I think first and foremost, it was a fun movie. I think in a way that obviously none of the prequels were, but also in a way that I don't think that the original trilogy was. I thought the original trilogy was a little bit more focused on being a space opera, and this one's a little bit more focused on being, fun. And they both have elements of both, right? They both have elements of being a space opera and being fun. But I think that this one kind of emphasized the second one, and I think it worked out really, really well, because I think that sort of the longer shots and the scenes that worked in the 70s, they pay a lot of homage to, and they don't necessarily replicate, but they don't but they they make it a modern movie that has a feel of the 70s Star Wars movies. And a lot of that is obviously very intentional. They have practical sets. They used a lot of the same tools, like they have like the actual like 35 millimeter film reels and stuff to work off of. And that's all cool, and I thought they did a good job. But also I think it's more than just it's fun. I thought the writing was really good. I thought that it was pretty sharp. I think it's a little bit obvious that the writing is more modern than it was in the 70s because the way the characters interact with each other, but that didn't break the universe in the way that maybe you might think it would. I thought that the characters were inviting. There's a bit, I think, from Red Letter Media when they did their review of Star Wars Episode 1. It's probably the most famous video that Red Letter Media has ever done. As they break down with all the reasons that the Phantom Menace sucked. And one of the reasons that they bring up is that the characters don't really have any character traits other than their job and their appearance. And so, there's a video where they ask people to describe people from the original trilogy, and then they also ask people to describe people from the prequels without mentioning what they look like, what their profession is, or what their role is. And they do a pretty phenomenal job.
Most people cannot do it.
Well, they do a pretty good job describing like Han Solo and Princess Leia. They cannot do a good job of describing people in the prequels, right?
Yeah, you can't describe Princess Amidala without describing the way she looks
because she doesn't have a personality. Yeah. But they do a very good job of injecting a lot of the characters in this movie with the kind of personality that will allow you to kind of explain who they are. Like, this character is like passionate and determined, and this character is determined, but definitely like in a different way. And this character is like clearly damaged and working through it in a way, but is still like a functioning member of society. And this character has like abandonment issues, and this character is like smart or doesn't care or is thoughtful or is thoughtless. There's a bunch of personality traits that you can apply to the characters. And one of my favorite bits is the big bad. I'm not going to give much away about him, but there's a lot of stuff that they reveal about him and his character without giving him a ton of screen time. There's a lot you learn about this guy from about his personality without him having to talk all that much. And that I thought was really good. I thought the way they handled Kylo Ren was I mean, frankly, it was beautiful. And I didn't expect to, come away really complimenting the writing more than just saying, yeah, the writing was worth it, and the writing kind of stood up to the test it needed to. But it was way more than just adequate. It was definitely, very good at moments. And I'm not saying it wasn't without flaws, and I have a couple of flaws. But in order to discuss that, I'd have to be more spoilery, and I'm not willing to do that. Anyway, definitely a 5 out of 7.
We'll discuss that more in weeks coming. I will not be able to see the film until this weekend. My birthday is on Sunday, and a screening of Star Wars is on the list of birthday activities. So maybe after Christmas. What is the statute of limitations for plot spoilers on a film this massive? It's got to be like a week, right?
Yeah, I'm wondering about that because when you talk about a cultural phenomenon, I think that you expect people to watch it sooner. So I think that there was like a longer statute of limitations on all the M. Night Shyamalan movies, right? Well, first because that's basically what their value was the twist at the end. And now there's no value once you reveal that. But I think second because there wasn't an expectation that you would see the others or whatever. Like on opening weekend. I think for this, the statute of limitations, I wouldn't go a week, maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks. I don't know.
No, I think, so Star Wars is unique in the sense that one, lots and lots of people want to go see it. And two, it is a property owned by a massive multi-platform media conglomerate that is like that has been shoving Star Wars stuff at us for weeks and will continue to do so for weeks. And it's just going to get more spoilery slowly as time goes on. Like I imagine Reddit is probably even worse than Facebook right now, just in terms of like acrimony being generated by Star Wars discussion. But
yeah, Reddit's doing a pretty good. Well, first, I think that if you log onto a specific subreddit, you know what you're signing up for. So, but I think that Reddit overall has been done a surprisingly good job. But I think that you're right that is a ship where you can't plug all the leaks.
It's a fraught landscape for the internet wanderer. But I think, by and large, if something is this like culturally massive And there are so many people who are like, I haven't seen it yet. Don't spoil anything. Like, at some point, you just have to take it on yourself to go and see the movie. And I think a week, maybe a week and a half, especially since people are going to be having, time off for the holidays and movie
Oh yeah,
theaters
that's a really good point.
famously
Yeah.
open on Christmas. Like if it's 3 weeks from when the movie came out and you're like, I still haven't seen it. I really want to go see it. Well, how much do you really want to go see it?
That's a
You
really good
know?
point. I think the vast majority of the people who are even vaguely positively interested, like interested enough to pay money to see it. I think the vast majority of those people will have seen it by the end of this weekend. So yeah, actually, you're right. I think a week. I think you're right about this. A week.
Okay, so we'll potentially get a little bit more spoilery next week on Norse Code.
Next week on Norse Code, we ruined Star Wars.
The Star Wars is already ruined. George Lucas
Okay.
made sure of that.
Well, have you read like the title to like half of the reviews about this movie? All of like half the reviews, the title is "Star Wars is back" or "The Force is back." So it was ruined, and it has been revived, according to a bunch of people with like really uncreative headlines.
Well, it's clickbait, I imagine, and I mean, I'm glad that the writing is genuinely good because historically the bar has been set so low
So
that,
low.
by comparison, you
Wow, I
could
didn't mean to do
do it.
that. I'm sorry.
Ha! It's true. Your true feelings have been revealed. You've betrayed yourself.
What? No, I didn't mean to do the solo thing because
Oh, oh,
that was
oh! Now
unintentional.
that was so low.
Yeah, and what you just did right now was better. You're right. All right, let's move on to what's the sport that
So
we
this is a
hockey?
football game.
Oh,
Hockey.
football. Yeah, yeah,
I
we do
love hockey.
football.
Go
We
Fighting
do love
Hawks.
hockey.
It's very disappointing how the Colorado Avalanche are one of the worst teams in the NHL this season. At least I've got
Yeah,
the Wild to watch. At least they come to Denver on a
it
fairly
is
regular basis.
a great thing that the Colorado Avalanche are terrible. Anyway,
So we play the Chicago Bears this week at TCF Bank Stadium, which I feel like I should be like pretty enthusiastic for, but just kind of taking the temperature of the blogosphere, and of course the extremely disappointing loss to Arizona last week. It's given me pause.
yeah, I think so. I think it kind of depends. I think early on, people were a little bit more depressed, but I think as time has gone on over the course of this week, in previewing the game, a lot of people have gotten more and more upbeat, and it helps that on Thursday night, that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers lost, and so the Vikings, I think they just have to win and they're in. I think that they're locked in to the playoffs if they win this, and I think that with that knowledge, that they're a step closer without having to do anything.
Well,
That
we
that
can
people
clinch
are
if one of four teams lose: the Falcons, the Giants, the Seahawks, or I'd have to look up the other one. But Atlanta or New
really
York is probably going to lose. Yeah,
only one of those teams has to lose
yeah.
out of
In order for
four.
yes, in order
Even
for
if
us
they
to.
were all favored to win, the Vikings have a massive chance of making the play. This is great.
I know, awesome, right?
Yeah.
However, all of that is predicated on a Vikings win. And as I think it was CC Norseman who wrote on Daily Norseman about how the Bears can now play like a team that has nothing to lose, having pretty much blown their last two games, despite fairly decent performances from Jay Cutler and company.
It was either CC or Eric, and I know Eric has a really good preview of the Bears. As of this recording, I've only read half of the preview, but it's very good.
So TDA, we've been sort of working in this system where we answer mailbag questions in line with the show because we keep running into the situation where people ask questions that we've already covered in the game breakdown. So we're just going to try to incorporate those questions in line as appropriate uh, from here on out, basically. And then there'll be a mailbag segment where we read hilariously long emails from people in foreign lands, like we will later today. But anyway, TDA at Texas Rat Killer on Twitter writes us, "Hell yeah! And the Vikes win on Sunday."
Oh
Or
man, we got more people
he
on the
just
hell
writes,
yeah
"Vikes
church.
win Sunday." So can
Well,
they?
yeah,
Will they?
yeah. Well, I mean, we'll talk about that in the preview, huh? Sure, maybe. I don't know. Let's talk about Vikings players and Bears players.
Okay. Well, the big news of the week, we didn't record last night. Normally we tape on Thursday night, but of course, Arif was in Star Wars heaven, and I was asleep watching a torturous Rams Buccaneers game that luckily I
Wait,
woke up and the right team had won.
you you fell asleep and you still had to watch the game?
No, I
Like, it
fell
was
asleep.
playing in your dreams?
No, I fell asleep while watching it, and I don't remember my dreams generally, but I'll get back to you on that. I guess the big news is that since we're recording on Friday morning, we were able to see who was active in practice and who was not, which is usually a pretty good harbinger of who's going to play on Sunday. The best news for the Vikings is that Harrison Smith and Linval Joseph both practiced, or both were at least limited participants in practice this week. The bad news, of course, being that Anthony Barr and Everson Griffin did not practice.
Right, and it sounds like, according to Chris Tomasin at the Pioneer Press, that Everson Griffin is expected to play on Sunday, which that's a big difference, I think, just overall in terms of the way injury news is playing out, from all the way back to Thursday when we were missing, all three players, but there was maybe a chance that one of them would play. Now we're at is sort of an opposite spot where there were four players who were under question. It looks like three of them will play. We still may miss Anthony Barr, which kind of sucks, but at the very least, the stuff that Anthony Barr does the bestest is the stuff that may not be as important versus the Bears as it would be another team. Obviously, that doesn't mean that Anthony Barr won't be critical because he improves the defense by being on it. But I think that comparatively speaking, it's not as bad as missing him, say, against the Cardinals, or more importantly, against the Seahawks. I think that those were bigger problems that the Vikings were not able to entirely overcome, but this time it's not as big of a problem, still a problem, in terms of missing Anthony Barr. So those are things to keep in mind as we move forward and talk about the Vikings defense versus the Bears offense. But yeah, the defense is looking better.
So, looking at the Bears offense, Jay Cutler has managed to put together a pretty decent season, despite just being Jay Cutler. Maybe his just like deep existential nihilism has elevated him to a place where he can have a pretty above average season, despite not having all the pieces one would need for a good football team surrounding him.
Yeah, no, I think that Adam Gase has really sort of tapped into Cutler's sort of self-punishing philosophy and turned it into outward productive energy. I think that the offensive coordinator's done a pretty good job taking advantage of the weapons that the Bears have and hiding a lot of the problems that the Bears have. Their offensive line, for example, has been pretty good about not giving up pressure, but it's a bad offensive line. They've been struggling about, getting Kyle Long back to his previous form, but he's probably their best player. They've got a lot of issues with their center, Hronis Grasu. They've got some issues with Charles Leno. They've got, issues all over their offensive line, but they've been able to paper over that with a very creative passing attack and, some pretty good work in the run game as well. And I think that, Cutler is not being forced to play a system he's not used to. He's just working within what he does well and what the offense does well. I think that Gase has done a good job making sure that he doesn't try to pigeonhole or change Cutler because, Cutler's old and he's definitely who he is. And designing offense with that in mind, I think, was really smart of him because the last offense Gase designed was the exact opposite. It was Peyton Manning's offense. So this dude's a smart dude. He's doing the opposite of what Trestman is, which is trying to pigeonhole Cutler. And it's turning into a productive season on offense for the Bears, for sure.
And you can see Jay Cutler. It seems like this season, compared to the last couple, he's had more luck or more success changing the play at the line of scrimmage than he has in years past. And one thing that's I think been really helpful to him is to be able to kind of rearrange the lineup at the start of the play, and then always have Alshon Jeffrey downfield just in case things don't work out, which it seems like they usually don't. And I know everybody was kind of concerned. Well, everybody that cares about the Bears was kind of concerned that without Brandon Marshall, who was going to be Cutler's security blanket. Alshon Jeffrey has gone on to be what is he, third best receiver in the league according to Pro Football Focus. So they're clearly making a connection.
Yeah, and I think there was some question about Alshon Jeffrey's health, but I think that he's going to be playing. So we can stow that remote possibility as a hope away and have to deal with somebody who I think is playing like an elite receiver, but just hasn't been on the field long enough for him to actually sort of be in that discussion. in terms of like things like end of season awards or people's perceptions. But Alshon Jeffrey has really truly been a pretty astounding player. I know Bears fans are actually a little bit frustrated with him because he's not healthy, but I think that he's worth it. I think that however much money he's going to command in free agency next year, I think the Bears are probably going to want to pay through the nose for that. So he's going to be difficult to deal with. I think that Xavier Rhodes is probably the best option. And it sounds like Terrence Newman's being put back at corner, which means that you have the option of having Xavier Rhodes follow Alshon Jeffrey or allowing the Bears to choose the matchup. And I really would just rather have Xavier Rhodes and Alshon Jeffrey just because of the way the matchup works and what Alshon Jeffrey's strengths are, which includes being physical at the point of contact, winning at the catch point, tracking the ball, stuff like that. I mean, he's a good route runner, and he's definitely quicker than he looks because he's such a big guy. But I think that Xavier Rhodes' strengths match up well to Alshon Jeffrey's strengths. I don't know that they can really sort of contain Alshon Jeffrey from a coverage perspective. I think that a lot of our work against Alshon Jeffrey, a lot of the work the Vikings will have to do against Alshon Jeffrey will have to come indirectly through things like pressuring Cutler or giving unfavorable looks. Maybe pre-snap coverages that double cover Alshon Jeffrey and forcing Cutler to check to the other side of the field. Stuff like that. But I think that the best opportunity for a matchup is to have Xavier Rhodes follow him.
Well, and I tell you, I was super stoked to see that Harry Smith is extremely likely to play this week because that gives us the opportunity to have Smith in looks where he could potentially break down and cover Jeffrey, but also line up closer to the line and be available for massive hits against players in the run game, like when he nearly released Matt Forte from the Earth's gravity in the first meeting.
You mean liberated Forte from the oppressive hold that gravity has on his body?
Freed him from the surly bonds of Earth.
Well, actually, so this is interesting. Ben Gessling just tweeted out that it sounds like Harrison Smith isn't super optimistic himself about Sunday. I don't know if he means optimistic about playing, because I think maybe he's optimistic about playing, but he's saying his left leg isn't where he wants it to be yet. So even if he does play, he may not be at full strength. Hopefully he plays. If not, maybe we'll get to see Terrence Newman play safety again, which I think is a positive move for the Vikings. I think that he may end up being a better safety than like Sendejo or Blanton. And then we may see Trey Waynes, in which case it'll be interesting to see what happens if Trey Waynes gets matched up against Alshon Jeffrey, because one of the issues with Trey Waynes, of course, is his weight, 186 pounds. Alshon Jeffrey's 225 pounds. That could potentially be problematic, and maybe they'll have to scheme around it. Who knows? Either way, something to watch. If Harrison Smith is healthy, obviously that's a good thing, but that might do a lot to help relieve the pressure caused by a player like Alshon Jeffrey.
So let's talk a little bit more about Matt Forte and specifically, I guess, the Vikings who will potentially be blocking him without Anthony Barr and with a limited Everson Griffin. I mean, it'd be super great to have Linval Joseph back. That would be a huge boon to our defense. But I mean, Matt Forte is pretty good, and Jeremy Langford is no slouch either. What are the how?
Yeah, it's difficult.
Can do.
Yeah, it's difficult for a lot of reasons. It's not just that they're good running backs, and you're right, they're both very good running backs. But it's that they're very good at playing a lot of diverse roles. They're both good at pass protection. They both do a good job running different routes for running backs. They both do a good job catching the ball. They're very versatile threats, and that's going to create a big problem, I think. But I think primarily, obviously, the threat that comes from them is running the ball, despite the fact that they're so multifaceted and versatile. So Linval Joseph being back, and it sounds like he will be. Linval Joseph being back is going to be huge. I think that's going to improve the run defense pretty massively. It allows Sharif Floyd to play his natural defensive tackle position at 3 technique. And it allows the Vikings to, win on first down a little bit more often. Brian Robinson might play a big role, with these backs that, provide both power and shiftiness. And, that's one of the problems with Matt Forte and Jeremy Langford is that they both kind of have underrated power and can run up the middle. But another thing you have to deal with is, these edge runs. And so I think Brian Robinson's run defense is going to be pretty important. He's done all right at that this year. Having Everson Griffin back, that's going to be or not back, but healthy is going to be nice because he's much better at run defense than Daniil Hunter, which is interesting considering that Hunter's job at LSU was almost entirely run defense, and he wasn't very good at he wasn't asked to pressure the passer all that much. Now it's kind of the opposite. Dylan Hunter is a little bit better at rushing the passer than he is defending the run. So I think Everson Griffin's going to be a big part of that. And then without Anthony Barr, it's going to be difficult. But one of the things that's kind of interesting about like Eric Kendricks is that his weaknesses coming out of the draft. A lot of people thought he wouldn't be great against the run, especially taking on blocks or getting through them, getting to the ball carrier and taking him down. That'd be much better in coverage because he was an elite coverage defender in college. It's kind of the other way around. He's doing a very, very good job against the run. The question is whether or not he can continue to hold up in coverage. He's had some coverage mistakes over the past couple of weeks. And, Forte and Langford are kind of the wrong running backs to run into when you have, this potential coverage problem. So I think Kendricks is going to have to improve quickly in order to deal with this problem. And then, what's going to happen maybe with Edmund Robinson, who replaces Anthony Barr, what's going to happen maybe with Chad Greenway. I think neither of them are really fits in coverage, and so I think that when it comes to that, it's going to have to be more scheme than it is player in dealing with the running backs of the air. But yeah, in terms of dealing with them in the run game, I mean, they're both very good, and so I'm not going to say they're going to bottle them up, but I think that from a matchup perspective, the Vikings are a lot better off.
How much do we have to be concerned about Zach Miller?
Not very. He's the bad Zach Miller, not the good Zach Miller. There's the tight end that played in Seattle, Zach Miller. That one's good. This one, like whatever.
Chicago Zach Miller is less impressive.
You think of him as Nebraska Omaha Zach Miller.
I don't know when he played there, but I will follow that. So my experience with Nebraska Omaha has been them just like soundly beating the Buffs in a period where Colorado had just a dismal excuse for a football team. So,
wow, that's sad.
The power of nepotism was very strong in Boulder, and the coach. I have excised his name from my memory, but the coach managed to get himself in a situation where the school really didn't want to pay him $2 million to quit, but after he instilled his own son at quarterback and they lost almost every game for 2 seasons, they finally had to let him go with his great big golden parachute.
That was not Eric Bieniemy, right?
Correct.
Right.
It was not. It was Dan. I'll look it up. I'll look it up when you're talking. But looking at the other side of the ball, our offense, I feel like, could do very well if it can execute on even just most of its cylinders. I mean, realistically, if we just triple team Pernell McPhee and, find a way to, maybe double team or 1.5 team Willie Young, then that should pretty much clear lanes for Adrian Peterson to run for like 200 yards and 3 touchdowns, right?
Yeah, no, I think you're right that the primary threat is going to be Pernell McPhee. I think the pass rush outside of him is actually just not that good. I think that the 3-4 that they run under the former Vic Fangio, that's it. It tries to one gap a lot, but as the season has gone on, they've gone on to do more 2-gap stuff. So they try not to threaten up the middle. They also play Acho at the other linebacker spot. And I think that for the most part, you have to watch out for Pernell McPhee, and then I think that the rest of the offensive line just kind of has to just do their job, which is tough. Obviously, it's like the worst offensive line in the league. But one thing to take note of, I think, is that against a team that didn't have a very good pass rush last Thursday, against Arizona, who had to generate their pressure through blitzes and often defensive back blitzes, the offensive line, up until obviously, a pretty fateful play late in the game, the offensive line did a much better job keeping Teddy free, and some of that has to do with like play calling, shorter play calling. Or shorter pass routes in offensive play calling and stuff like that. But the offensive line, when they're up against a really bad pass rush or a bad defensive line, they can not be a danger to Teddy, which is nice. Maybe that's the best way to put it. They might end up having a triple team, Pernell McPhee, because Clemmings is going to be up against him a lot. That's where McPhee lines up. There were some problems, I think, the last time the Vikings played Chicago from that matchup. So you're going to have Rudolph and Ellison and maybe Michael Pruitt, helping Clemmings out. And at times, Clemmings will just have to be one-on-one based off of the situation and the play call. and that's something that they're just going to have to deal with. But the Vikings did a pretty reasonable job, if I remember correctly. I think there was only one sack last time they played the Bears, and there was not nearly as much pressure as we've seen sort of in more recent games. So it is possible, despite the fact that they've got a pretty good pass rusher, that the Vikings will be able to hold up, especially if Norv continues with the play calling that kind of fits the offensive skill sets better.
So, given that, what would you set the over-under at for a number of times Matt Khalil gets turnstile by Willie Young?
Uh, 0.5, actually. I think Matt Khalil's actually been having a pretty decent season. It's just, we remember the Dwight Freeney play.
We remember the very last play that that happened, and it's actually the very definition of recency bias. Now, I think one would be fair. I think we could expect it to happen once. I mean, maybe not for a game-ending, sack strip, but still, I mean, I don't know. I would like to see good Matt Khalil, not bad Matt Khalil this week, and I just don't think that he will get as much help on the left side as will be devoted to the right. So.
Yeah, no, Willie Young is definitely somebody that you have to keep an eye on for sure. I mean, he's not as good as like McPhee or whatever, and the pass rush is generally suffered. He's been playing all right, but they rotate him a lot more than they do McPhee, so he's more of a situational threat, like, in nickel packages and stuff like that. And I don't know, I guess I liked what I saw from Matt Khalil early in the season. He's had a couple of screw-ups, including maybe that one. But yeah, no, I wouldn't be surprised if Khalil only got beaten once or none times.
Zeros times.
Zeros times. Yes. Hooray.
Coach Dan Hawkins coached his son Cody to losing records for 3 years in a row.
Oh, I remember this. Yeah, I didn't even pay attention to Colorado football, and I remember this. Man.
You didn't really miss anything. Hawkins was originally the coach at Boise State and offered his son a scholarship to play there. But then when he went to Colorado, when Dan went to Colorado to become the head coach, he offered his son another scholarship to play there.
Man, some people have these really close relationships with their fathers that it just doesn't seem like you see that often anymore, and I include myself in that. Because even if you love your father, which I would wager most people do you really want to follow them into college so that they could coach you? You can't get away.
I mean, would I want my father coaching me at, a high level in a sport? Would I want to go to practice every day and have to deal with one of my parents? No. Would I want basically
but you want to start, right?
A free ticket to being the starting quarterback where I get to go to school and live in Boulder for functionally free? That would be pretty awesome. I could handle.
That's probably, you're right. That's probably worth it.
A few hours a day. Having lived in Boulder, I can tell you it's pretty awesome, and it's also pretty awesome even if you're the quarterback of a bad football team because you're still the starting quarterback. It still has some play. So Adrian Peterson, he's set up to have a pretty great game, but I mean, how likely do you think it is that we're going to see him fumble, 2 or more times?
Well, he's due, right? He didn't fumble last game. But no,
the whole game.
Yeah, so he's due. No, I think there's maybe a reasonable chance of it. I haven't taken a look at how good the Bears are at forcing fumbles, so maybe I should take a deeper look into that. I know from a skill set perspective, the free safety Adrian Amos, who I wanted in the draft, he's playing really well, and that's one of the skill sets he had in college, if I remember correctly. And so maybe that's something to watch out for. But Shea McClellan, I think it's C.J. Anderson, the other linebacker. They don't bother me from that perspective, or really from most perspectives. They're not very good. So maybe they're not necessarily great at forcing fumbles, in which case that's fine because the Bears are maybe right now the worst team in the league at defending the run. It kind of depends on these sorts of matchups when you take a look at them because every team this year is it's kind of unusual the number of backup quarterbacks and the backup running backs they've had to play against, and it's like very difficult to like sort of gauge how good they are. But I think that the Bears are probably one of the worst at it, despite the fact that they're much better in coverage and passing defense than you would have expected going into the season. So yeah, I think we're set up for an Adrian game. I think we're set up for like a game where the over under on the number of yards he's going to produce is like 110. Like I think that I wouldn't be surprised if he got like 110 and 2 touchdowns.
So you kind of touched on this a little bit just when you were talking about how the Vikings offense can execute. But is it really so terrible if Teddy, gets hurried a bunch of times as long as he doesn't take any Dwight Freeney style sack strips at really crucial moments?
Well, I mean, it matters insofar as it's going to impact his play, because it's a pressure, and quarterbacks, can lose like 30 passer rating points when they're pressured. Teddy's done a pretty decent job of avoiding that problem, but he's not playing as well under pressure as he did last season. And so, yeah, it is. I think it's going to end up being significant. Whether or not he's going to be pressured. And I think that, the solution to that is to continue with a shorter passing game with a couple of deep shots. And so, having Wallace run crossers, I think that's, the best use of Wallace within this offense. I think that it is no less a skill set of his than his ability to get open deep. And his ability to get open on crossers and produce some pretty cheap yards after the catch, especially given who the Bears have over the middle here, like I said, McClellan and Anderson. I think that there's a good chance that Teddy will be able to get rid of the ball quickly. Pressure is not going to matter as much, and they'll be able to they'll be able to produce. So that's some of it. Stephon Diggs, of course, he's good at all three levels. But if they emphasize sort of the intermediate game for him, I wouldn't be upset about that or anything. I think Jarius Wright is really set up to do well in this game. I think that if you take a look at sort of how well they've done against nickel receivers, although I don't know that for a fact that they haven't done extraordinarily well against nickel receivers. I will say that the Bears have had a devilish time dealing with number one receivers, but I think in this case, an emphasis not just on Diggs, but on Jarius Wright, I think is probably going to be pretty productive. I don't believe. I think it's Bryce Callahan is their nickel corner. He's not playing as well as he did before he arrived at the Bears. And I think that Kendall Fuller and the Saints guy Tracy Porter are both playing better than they did last season by enough that I wouldn't mind emphasizing Jarius Wright in this game.
So how many receptions do you think Adrian Peterson is going to get? Is this going to be one of those games where Norb dusts off the old let's try short passes over the middle or between the hashes to all day?
Yeah, that's a really good question because, it's not as if he hasn't had some really disappointing moments that have kind of stuck out in our heads in terms of his like reception ability.
This seems like the kind of game where this might work,
Yeah, I totally agree. So the question is kind of like, do you run away from it because of Adrian's skill set and just how good he is at running the ball? Or do you do it because the Bears are not that great at covering running backs? Which I think if you take a look at like their DVOA against running backs is pretty average, but I think from a matchup perspective they're actually worse than those numbers indicate. So I think so. I think that they'll get Adrian involved. They'll at least make him a passing option a little bit more often. If they don't do this triple team on Pernell McPhee, where it's going to be Clemmings and Peterson or Rudolph, in situations where they're in passing downs and Adrian's on the field, I think that that would make a lot of sense. Like I said, I think their linebackers are awful. They may be the worst linebackers in the league. I think the linebackers are awful. And so, maybe they'll have Brzezinski drop down to cover Adrian. I think that's a terrible idea because if he catches the ball, Brzezinski's going to go flying. But whatever it is, I think that from a matchup perspective, I think that getting Adrian involved in the passing game is pretty smart, even if he's not a super reliable option. At any rate, you'll probably get another kind of like cheap yards after the catch, which, yards are yards. And if you can produce them through your scheme and through the matchup, you might as well do it.
Tommy the Gun, Tommy the Gun 13 writes us, the Charles Johnson Project, dead for good?
By the way, Ben Guessing just tweeted out the outs and injuries, so we can update things based off of that. Linval, Joseph, and Everson Griffin are questionable. I'm guessing both will play. Anthony Barr is out. Harrison Smith is out, which
Oh,
means we may do the Newman to safety, Waynes to corner thing. Charles Johnson out, so I don't know if that answers your question, but he's out for an ankle injury. It kept him out of practice yesterday. Scott Crichton is out as well, which is one of the reasons they probably re-signed Justin Tretto. So to get to your question, we'll have to answer it basically only in the long term. Maybe, yeah, I think the Vikings have kind of mishandled the receiver rotation. I think after Wallace started disappointing like week 3, obviously you could have waited a couple of weeks before you made a drastic move, but I think that they should have started subbing in Charles Johnson and Adam Thielen and even Cordero Patterson for Mike Wallace's snaps because, I mean, it was pretty clear after, week 4, week 5 that Wallace was just not producing. And I think that putting him on the field, the likelihood that Charles Johnson and Cordero Patterson and Adam Thielen are worse receivers than Wallace is all, that likelihood might be high based off of what they see in practice, but the impact is functionally null because, I mean, there were like 3 games where Wallace got no targets, right? And I think that the amount of production that Wallace was producing means that there's a significantly lower chance of a downside of playing, more snaps for these 3 receivers. And obviously, receivers can be bad enough to cause interceptions and stuff like that. It's not like there's zero downside, but I think that the downside was really limited. Like, because what's the impact of, Charles Johnson takes more snaps from Wallace and he's a worse receiver? Not that much, given how little Wallace has contributed. So I thought they mishandled this receiver thing, kind of all year. Obviously Stephon Diggs. Maybe we could have said that he should have been on the field sooner. And replace Charles Johnson, whatever. Maybe that's an example of mishandling the receiver thing. But I think another example is just the way that they've handled the Wallace thing. So I think maybe it's dead. But it kind of depends on, I think, Wallace is gone next year. Charles Johnson has another chance to compete for a starting wide receiver opportunity. Obviously, he didn't do very well at the beginning of the year when he had it. And he'll probably be competing against a drafted receiver. So good chance Charles Johnson as a starting receiver project is dead. I think that he's probably better depth than the Vikings are playing him.
Hashtag zombie Charles Johnson. So score prediction for this game.
Well, it looks like you have me first, so I'll do that. I don't. I didn't look at the over/under. I imagine that you'll inform us of like sort of the implied points that each team will score. But I would not be surprised if this was a lower scoring game than the over/under. Not because of, any feelings I have about the Vikings offense or the Bears offense. I think the Vikings offense is going to play better in this game than they have the past couple of games, and the Bears offense is pretty good. I just have a good feeling about the Vikings defense. So Vikings 28, Bears 20, which actually that may hit the over/under now that I think about it.
That is the over. The over/under is 43. And,
oh, wow. Okay. So okay. Ooh,
and,
man, I'd hit the over.
Minnesota is a 6-point favorite. Right? I definitely like the over. There may be a few German Jesties going down on that this weekend. I think 28-20 or 28-21 is a.
You can't choose 28-20. I chose 28-20. You have to choose a different one.
But yeah, that annoys me. I should have gone first because that's like right where I thought it was going to be too. All right,
that's the risk you took, man.
I know. I gambled and lost. That never happens. All right, then I will just to be contrary. I will come up with a completely different game script. That this game is played mostly between the 30s and is a festival of anemic offense and defensive mistakes that leads to way more turnovers than anybody predicted, but still a Vikings win with a score of 17-10.
Oh wow! Okay, yeah, the 28-20 versus 17-10. That was a good way to move. Yeah, fair enough.
I mean, I don't see the Bears winning this one unless something goes really horribly wrong for the Vikings.
Yeah, friggin' like that's impossible. You're right.
Yeah. Well, let's go right to the mailbag. because Tommy Gunn asks us another question. What is the biggest thing that could most tarnish a Vikings win on Sunday? You know, like the Vikings being the Vikings.
Oh, Teddy getting hurt. I can't think of another thing that would tarnish the win more.
Yeah, Teddy getting hurt. I guess just really bad injuries to really key players. Joseph being out for the season after rushing it and playing too early, his leg injury getting aggravated. Um, yeah, Teddy getting hurt would be just about the worst thing that could ever happen. Uh, Adrian Peterson fumbling away the ball at a very crucial moment would be pretty
Well,
bad.
well,
Although I
he's
guess
he's presupposing a Vikings win, so that's the
predicating
tarnish
a
a win.
win,
Yeah,
and yeah, I nothing other than injuries, and I would say injuries to Teddy or Linval Joseph would be the worst thing that could happen right now.
for sure.
Cheezel at UPHX Pyros writes us, who do you see as an ideal wide receiver one for the Vikings next year in the draft or free agency, and why?
Is that University of Phoenix Online Pyros? That's a great Twitter ad. Um,
Right?
let's see. If we're gonna go FA, I think Alshon Jeffrey. I think that the ability to sort of control the field from the passing game, control the passing game as a fulcrum of the offense, I think is pretty difficult to find. I think that even when you find really good receivers like Antonio Brown and AJ Green, they have to be really good in order to sort of control the plane. And if they're not jump ball guys like Antonio Brown, they have to be pretty phenomenal. Brown is, but I think that other people in the mold of Brown are unlikely to do that. And I think Alshon Jeffrey is the perfect example of the kind of player who can do that based off of what their skill set is. I think that Alshon Jeffrey, a lot of people think about these jump ball receivers and think of these slow guys that have to win at the catch point, but Jeffrey isn't. He just happens to also win a lot at the catch point. He's a good route runner. He's pretty quick. He's fast. He's big. Yeah, I mean, you're right. He's an elite receiver who just hasn't been able to accumulate that accolade because of the time that he's missed on the off the field. And I think those things won't necessarily continue for him. I think that when you talk about injury proneness, sometimes you kind of overrepresent the likelihood that a player who's injured in the past could get injured in the future. And I know the Vikings have had that problem with Kyle Rudolph, but I mean, there are examples throughout the league that we easily forget about injury-prone players that are no longer injury-prone. I think Matt Stafford may be the best example of a player who everyone thought was injury-prone and isn't. Drew Brees is another good example. And there are running backs who have overcome an injury-prone label. There are, Adrian Peterson was injury-prone coming out of Oklahoma, and then he was pretty healthy for 7 years. And then there are the receivers who were injury-prone that don't happen to be injury-prone. And I think that Alshon Jeffrey is going to be more like Stafford and Brees than he is like Percy Harvin. So that's the kind of person in free agency that I would want to get. I think that it's unlikely that they could get him. He is young, but and so he would be an FA target. But I think that Chicago just sews him up. I think that it's impossible for the Chicago to let him leave. So I think that would be the ideal guy. If it's in the draft, I think Laquan Treadwell is probably the best receiver. He embodies a lot of those qualities, but he's probably going to go too early. So you could debate between Corey Coleman and Josh Doxson. I like Josh Doxson a bit more. I don't know. I've wanted somebody who could win contested catches. Like, I am overvaluing this trait in a receiver, and I'm kind of unashamed about it. And I think that it may even be detrimental to the way that I'm viewing the position right now. But it's just been such a big lack for the Vikings. And when you take a look at these great contested catch receivers, or even cores where they have good contested catch receivers, you could take a look at Tampa Bay last year. I mean, Mike Evans isn't playing well this year, but last year you look at Mike Evans and Vincent Jackson. And they bailed out their quarterbacks. You could take a look at what Alshon Jeffrey and Brandon Marshall did together in Chicago. Eric Decker, to some degree, can do that. So, Marshall and Decker are doing a great job of winning the 50-50s that Fitzpatrick keeps throwing. There's a lot of receiver cores that are built on, Cam Newton is supposed to have it. Obviously, those receivers have gotten injured a bit too often, but, that can cover over things like overthrows and inaccuracy or whatever, but they just genuinely make the quarterback look a lot better. And the Vikings are blessed with a receiver core that tends to make the quarterback look a lot worse. So I just want these big-bodied receivers that can win at the catch point, be a red zone threat, and so on. So that's the ideal.
I will defer to your much broader and deeper knowledge in terms of the draft, but for free agents, I agree with you that the bidding war for Alshon Jeffrey, I mean, if anyone other than Chicago engages in it, is immediately going to become too rich for the Vikings.
Right.
I think in terms of like somebody who would be a bargain and maybe good for like a 1 or 2 year contract would be Anquan Bolden.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, that'd be a great heady veteran presence, but also tough as nails and another guy who has those contested catch qualities. For sure. No, that's great. I like that.
Exactly. He's good at contested catches. He is kind of a downside at the one thing you talked the most about, which is being a formerly injured player who is no longer injured. Historically, he has been a regular starter, except for like this year and last year. And
That may be age related. I don't know.
well, and that's the thing. He's 35 years old, and he hasn't. I mean, admittedly, San Francisco has a lot of issues at with their offense and quarterback in general, but he hasn't seen that many targets, and he hasn't had that many receptions just in the last like several weeks. Not saying that that's like an indicative trend of a whole season or whatever, but my suspicion is that the bidding war for Anquan Bolden will be much less heated. We'll say.
Yeah, I think much less heated is a good way to characterize it.
So that would be my suggestion. Um, Matt Nelson at nmat71 writes us, can we get fully healthy for the playoffs, or are we going to end up limping in with almost all of our defensive difference makers banged up? I think the injury report this week kind of gives you a window into the future there.
Well, I mean, we could be fully healthy by the time the playoffs start because it sounds like the guys that are injured on defense are guys that were maybe close to starting this week but just didn't. Which I think 3 weeks from now, I think that those three guys, the three that matter the most, Linval, Joseph Anthony, Barr, Harrison Smith, I think they'll be healthy. Obviously, I can't predict if like the entire starting defense is going to avoid injuries for 3 weeks, but I think that it's possible that by the time the playoffs start, the Vikings defense could be fully healthy.
I agree. Racer K at Racercraft writes us with a couple of questions. In the Norse code intro theme, what does the Morse code actually spell out? I don't know.
Yeah, so I saw this question and I tried listening to the Morse code theme and then inputting it into one of the online Morse code translators, and it was just like, the Morse code's too quick. I listened to it 4 times and now I'm bored. So I didn't find out. But I bet at least one of our listeners knows Morse code, and they can tell us that it means absolutely nothing. I think I have gleaned that the first letter is F. So good chance it means nothing.
So it starts with F, Racer K. I guess we could go back to the guy that made the clip for the show that kind of predated Norse code as it exists now. But I mean, in any
Norse
case,
code, the lost episodes, yeah.
yeah, right. In any case, we're getting new music for next season, along with some other new things. So hold on to your ears for that. I think the new theme submitted to us by a listener is like the existing theme. I mean, I like it because it was music that fit the name of the show and also gave us an easy show name. But I don't know that. I think it's a little bit like hard and angry for kind of the style of the show. And
That's
the new
true.
theme,
It feels like we should have like more sound effects and be gruffer and talk about toughness more often.
we should be larger
It
and
sounds
have
good.
longer beards. Like that, we should both be like 350 pound, like 6'3" dudes with like really long beards. Like that
Like where
just got
ZZ Top gone to seed. Like where ZZ Top who's
just
had a little bit
back
too
to
much to
the
eat.
CC Top show. Yes, exactly what I was about to say. Um, and that doesn't really fit in with kind of the way that we roll the show. And the new theme is appropriately sillier. So
Well, I do like this old theme, but you're right, it doesn't fit the theme of the show as much.
no, I mean I like the old one. It's a good theme. It's gotten us through 3 entire seasons. But I mean, in the interest of switching things up and keeping it fresh, there are a few bits and pieces of the show that could use a shine up in advance of season 4. So we'll be doing that. But yeah, if any of our listeners are particularly good with Morse code and can tell us what the coder is signaling, that would be cool. We'll definitely read it on the air. Racer K's actual question: between Newman, Harris, and Exum, do the Vikings need to draft a safety in 2016?
I mean, they probably have to draft a safety. It's just kind of a question of when and where they would draft that safety. So I think for 2016 it could be in the third or fourth round, but I think that you could get by with a year of Newman at safety. I think that he's probably better than Harrison Exum. Exum, there's a reason that he couldn't see the field. We kind of saw why in his second game as a starter. Obviously, I thought he played all right in his first game. Anthony Harris, I thought he played all right in his game, but I just don't know if they're long-term options. But I think that if Newman is going to be the plan for next year, I think that doesn't preclude trying to grab a talented safety if they're available to the Vikings, just because he's old and you want to replace him sooner rather than later. So it kind of depends on Harrison Exum, but I think that they probably will have to draft a safety. I just think that they may be able to draft one in the fourth or fifth round, have them compete in the 2017 offseason, Harris, Exum, and mid-round safety, and you'll probably produce a pretty good starter out of the three of them together, all while Newman holds down the fort for the 2016 season. So yeah, draft one, but maybe not like in the first round or anything. Unless Jalen Ramsey falls, then all bets are off.
We've had an email question from James Reed languishing in the Norse Code Podcast at gmail.com inbox, which you can email questions to if you like. For what, like 10 days now? Almost 2 weeks? We haven't forgotten your question.
Nearly 2 weeks, yeah.
I'm only saving it for an episode where James is on because I feel it's a good question and it needs more than one thoughtful answer. And I cannot provide a thoughtful answer because the only two things I know about the NBA this season are that it's usually safe to bet against the Timberwolves and that Steph Curry is probably the best basketball player alive right now.
Oh, for sure. I even thought that it was kind of funny that people didn't think that he was the greatest shooter in NBA history, and then a bunch of old people brought up Larry Bird, and obviously Larry Bird is the former best shooter in NBA history. But Steph Curry's changing the game in ways that have never been changed before and have changed the fundamental geography and geometry of basketball. So, greatest shooter in history, that's all I need to know. And we're going to answer your question in full when we have a bigger, better basketball fan than Dusty.
Or which actually could be almost any person who watches any sport. So once we have at least one more qualified person, because I actually would enjoy hearing James and Arif's answer to this question as well. So we have not forgotten about you, James. We're just saving you. We do have one email that I am going to read, and it's nearly in its entirety because it's phenomenal. It's from a gentleman named John Mainland, and he writes us, "Gentlemen, I'm a long-suffering Vikings fan here in Kirkcaldy, Scotland. Enjoy trying to pronounce my hometown, by the way. I did. It it reminds me of saying caca. Caca. I did a bit for the Daily Norseman about my only Vikings game. There's a link to a Daily Norseman article from 2013 that we will include in the show notes if you would care to read it, which was one of the best days of my so far mildly exciting life. I am not working at the moment, so forgive the lack of a donation, but am enjoying a quote-unquote purple patch of being able to enjoy your very fine podcast as I have for a couple of seasons now, and am also dipping into the 9 to Noon show with Paul Allen, which is good.
Oh, cool.
Right? Which is good, but has the byproduct that I now know there was a bar with lady dancer people in Mankato and that Dickies speak barbecue. I am confused by that as well.
Okay.
As regards the question, can I ask what the longer-term prospects are for the Vikes, namely next season and beyond? We have a good young squad and a quarterback who continues to learn on the job. The Cardinals game, sorry for bringing it up, showed we have some good talent amongst the rookies.
That's true. Long-term prospects for the Vikings, I think, are very positive. No, they've got a great young team, not just the rookies. Six of whom I think started in the Cardinals game. It was absurd. But I mean, I think there's a lot of young players that show a lot of promise. If you exclude players that were formerly in this category, like Kyle Rudolph and Matt Khalil, I think you still have a strong young core. I like Jerick McKinnon a lot. I think that he's better than the average starting running back in the NFL, and the bar for that is very high because there's a lot of running back talent right now. Obviously, there's Teddy Bridgewater, who a lot of people know that I'm high on. And then Stephon Diggs, I think obviously could be a lot of people think that he could be a really really good wide receiver too. Maybe because he's been given more attention. That's his ceiling. But I think that with an off season, I think that he can become a wide receiver one because he is physical. He just has to be a little bit better about winning in physical situations. But beyond that, I think on defense you just have a very young team. I think that sort of the oldest member of the future is probably Everson Griffin. I think Brian Robinson's going to end up being replaced. I don't know if it's going to be by Daniil Hunter or Scott Crichton, both of whom are pretty good. Obviously, Hunter is a little bit more exciting. He's good. He's young. He's a rookie. Xavier Rhodes, he's having a down year, but I think that he's shown flashes of what he could be from last year. And then, it kind of depends on Trey Waynes. A lot of people know that I'm down on him, but he's been having a good year when he's on the field so far. Harrison Smith, obviously young, great. Linval Joseph, extraordinarily young for kind of what we imagine him to be. I think he's going to start the season next year at age 26. Then there's Sharif Floyd, Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks, who he's having an up and down year, but I'm very optimistic about his play. And then we're going to see what happens at the linebacker position, whether or not it's going to be a drafted guy, whether or not it's going to be like Edmund Robinson, which I feel is unlikely. Or what. But I think that there's a lot of young players on the defense that are very good. I think on offense, you've got a couple of young, talented players to build around. That offensive line, Mike Harris is really good. TJ Clemmings, I'm still not down on the idea that he could be a long-term starter. Obviously, he's terrible this year, but I think in terms of the long-term prospects, the Vikings, things are definitely pointing up. It's less about who they could get and more about who they have and less about the potential that they've shown and more about the talent that they already seem to have. Except for TJ Clemmings. That's all potential.
Yeah, big asterisk on him, but otherwise, yes. I think with only, one or two key veteran acquisitions in free agency per year over the next couple of years and, one or two good reaches in the draft, either reach down or reach up, which, we've already shown that the front office has some skill in that regard. Will be in the playoffs and potentially contenders for a ring next year and probably more so the year after.
Yeah, and obviously it depends on, like how they draft and what they do in free agency and stuff like that. But yeah, I think that you could say that they're contenders for a ring by the time the Vikings host the Super Bowl for sure.
Yeah,
by the
we're
time
not,
Minnesota, sorry.
Back to the email. Now that I've got that out the way, the real reason I emailed is, of course, food related. Scotland is not...
Of course.
Hooray! Right? Scotland is not renowned for its culinary heritage, but I recently spent 11 and a half months in France. This may have explained in part some of your listener figures for that fine nation, which was commented on a couple of months back, though I'm sure it wasn't only me. Well, there you go, James. So I'm going to apologize in advance for butchering all these French words that I'm about to attempt to read. So here we go.
You're forgiven.
I had on a gloriously sunny day by the Dordogne River in a charming village called La Roque-Jacques a salad with duck 4 ways. Duck pâté with a couple of triangles of toast, thinly sliced magret de canard, gizzards, which are much nicer than they sound, and confit de canard, duck leg confit.
Ooh, wow.
I know, that sounds like a pretty great salad. It was, for want of a better description, effing amazing. Thus, what has been / would be your preferred food done 4 ways in one dish?
It's kind of hard to beat duck, man. I love duck. It's definitely one of my favorite meats. I would choose a meat for this, by the way. So, that puts on the table chicken, which no. Turkey, obviously no. Pig, maybe, but probably not. Because I think that the high points for pig are very high. I think that sort of the middle points are kind of lower. Cows, I think for sure. I think that you could have, you could do an individual meat 4 ways. I think there's a lot of interesting ways to treat short ribs. You could do, 4 different kinds of beef meat. That would be pretty interesting. And then I'm trying to think. I like, goat meat, but I don't think that one's as interesting to prepare in multiple ways. Man, that's I would. It's hard to beat duck, and maybe it's just because that you described how amazing this specific meal was that I'm biased. But well, if I have to choose a different meat, it's gonna be short ribs. So I didn't want to be too vague and say a cow, so I'm gonna pick short ribs.
All right. I have not had terribly many individual food items prepared four ways in one dish. But the one that stands out to me is a slight variation made for me by one of the chefs at the restaurant where I earn my keep. Um, we have a dessert called banana three ways, but they made it for me once with a fourth way. And so my answer is banana. It's a dessert where they make a like a mock sushi roll out of a banana and some sushi rice and soy paper, and then they roll it in like panko breadcrumbs, like Japanese breadcrumbs, and
Hmm.
tempura fry it. So the outside is crispy, but the banana is still like mostly raw inside. And then they slice it up and arrange it very artfully on a plate next to some homemade banana ice cream and a banana tuile style cookie. And then normally they just apply honey and like crushed cashews like all over the dish and the plate, and that's what it is. But one of the chefs, he's a cool dude, and I had done him a solid recently, so he elevated his game and made a like a Nutella syrup that also had like cinnamon and banana extract and like some honey in it. So it was like some kind of
Oh
crazy like,
wow.
oh yeah, it was like all the good flavors all at once. And he did like a really artful drizzle over the plate. It was really pretty, and the honey and the Nutella like kind of solidified over the ice cream, but stayed melted over the like banana sushi roll. So it was like almost like,
Oh.
yeah, it was great. It was like almost like the crust on like a dip cone from Dairy Queen on the ice cream, but like melty saucy goodness on the banana sushi roll. So the banana four ways I think was probably one of the top five desserts I've ever eaten, and definitely my favorite individual food done four ways. I'm not saying that there aren't others. I mean, I'm intrigued by the idea of pig four ways or beef four ways, but of ones I've had, I would say banana so far has been the most spectacular.
Yeah, I've had a lot of treatments of foie gras that were amazing, a lot of treatments of foie gras that were awful, and I wouldn't be surprised if foie gras four ways, so long as it's not too heavy or rich, wouldn't be astounding as well.
John finishes by saying, "Keep up the brilliant work and thanks for your continued efforts. I was part of a football podcast over here a few years back, so I know the amount of work required behind the scenes. And by football, I of course mean the game the U.S. women are good at."
That was a good one.
Skull John Mainland. P.S. I don't do Twitter because, as you may have guessed, I can say nothing in only 140 characters.
My kind of man, John.
Mine as well. PPS. We are enjoying Donald Trump over here. A Trump is a reasonably polite term for a fart slash bottom burp in
Bottom
the
perp.
UK. I know. That might be the best part of this entire email. Uh,
Let's
in the
start calling
UK,
things bottom burps now.
which further undermines his clearly clueless racist ramblings, especially for those who remember the name of his ex-wife. Congratulations, John. You are the king of email questions.
Yeah, it's gonna be hard to outdo that one.
That was fantastic. I felt like that one deserved to be read in its entirety.
For sure, you made a strong creative choice with that.
Thank you so much for your email, John. We really appreciate it. Keep on listening from wherever you are in the world. It mystifies James to no end why we keep getting all these listens from all over Europe. Um, and yeah, when you find yourself gainfully employed, if you feel like sending us about Tree Fitty, then we would really appreciate that as well. But it is not required. All that is required is that you continue to listen to Norse Code and maybe check out the dailynorseman.com website for fantastic writing and an analysis about the Vikings. Arif has a piece about Teddy Bridgewater and numbers. I guess the numbers. Arif has performed the math and is here to tell you that Teddy Bridgewater is better than he looks, and the Teddy Truthers, while vocal, belong in the minority. Beyond that, you can follow Arif at Arif Hassan NFL, not Arif Hassan DN. That account has been suspended. You can follow me at Dusty O'Connell. You can follow our producer James at Big Mono. He also maintains the official Norse Code Twitter account at NorseCodeDN. Email us your questions, norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. Check out our Facebook page, but not this weekend because, Star Wars, at facebook.com/Daily Norseman. Visit the website, norsecodepodcast.com. Catch up on all the episodes, and feel free to click the PayPal donate link at the bottom if you would like to make a one-time contribution to the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. If you would like to be a real hero and make a recurring contribution of any amount you like, then click the Patreon link or just go straight to patreon.com/NorseCode. Do you have any parting shots? Anything you would like to leave our listeners with before we adjourn for the week?
No, I think people should read the Teddy piece. I think a lot of people don't know, or maybe do know. I'm not like a trained statistician, so I've kind of had to bootleg everything. But I've gotten some feedback from statisticians who really appreciated it, which is really nice because I kind of, was winging some of it. And then maybe there's the possibility to produce, so at the very bottom of the piece, I've got something that's, a very, very rough approximation using already rough approximations, a very, very rough approximation of how to gauge a quarterback's development with a points system, as it were. And I've gotten some feedback on how to really rigorously create one that allows us to really track whether or not a quarterback, by the time they're in their second year, is on the path to bustum, stardom, or ambiguity. So, I think it's a fun piece, and I've gotten a lot of feedback, not just from stats people, but from football people who liked it. And I was proud to produce it. So that's all I have.
Awesome. A couple of small programming notes. James will be here early next week with Arif to recap the Bears game. Hopefully a win over the Bears where nobody is injured. And then following that comes a holiday of relatively serious cultural import in America. And so consequently, next Thursday, I believe it is, instead of a preview show, we will be bringing you the, third annual Norse Code Christmas special, a collection of gaffes and outtakes that did not make it into the show. Believe it or not, we make more mistakes than are even included in the show. And a few of them are worth a chuckle. And we will be compiling those and releasing that episode to you next week. And then we will preview the game, but probably not until fairly close to game time. So since I will be away from the microphone until after the holiday, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, whatever else to everybody out there who listens to Norse Code, and to your families and friends as well. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be able to podcast along with you these last few years, and I look forward to continuing for the foreseeable future, and perhaps even the unforeseeable future, which I think is a little more meaningful. That's going to do it for episode 109 of Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. We will see you early next week, and until then, our formula is this: keep Teddy alive.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.